What's the state of your website? If you're looking for a new digital experience platform, or DXP, to run your digital experiences, I have the book for you. The Agile Brand Guide to Digital Experience Platforms is part of my best-selling series of MarTech books. In this book, I explore and demystify DXPs and look at the roles a digital experience platform should play, the different types on the market, as well as how to initially evaluate platforms, then how to best implement a DXP once you've selected it. The book also features a foreword from Rupali Jain, Chief Product Officer at leading DXP provider Optimizely, as well as several other thought leaders in the industry. Learn more and get a copy in print or digital now by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com.
Hi, this is Greg Kihlstrom. Welcome to the Agile World podcast, where we discuss customer experience, employee experience, and transformation in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, a blueprint for creating an experience-led organization, now available on Amazon and other retailers.
My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of CareerGig and host of the Agile World podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to create a personal brand that is agile, memorable, and meaningful in a world gone mostly virtual. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jennifer Sherman, founder and chief strategist at the Influencer Collective. First, why don't you tell me a little bit about the Influencer Collective and what you do there?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's great to connect again. And the Influencer Collective, we are a podcast production and digital asset strategy firm. So we really specialize in building thought leaders through the medium of podcasting and using strategic marketing to amplify that content.
Great. Well, let's start by talking about the importance of personal brands. Why don't you first start by explaining how you define personal branding?
Sure. So, kind of growing up in, I guess, the digital transformation world, it's important now than ever with the access to social media that we have at our fingertips from even when you're in high school to really make sure that your digital footprint is how you would want to express yourself. Because with the internet, it's on there forever, right? So personal branding is really defines who you are and goes back to your mission as a human being and how you market yourself and define yourself and put yourself in the online and offline marketplace.
So how do you recommend, I know this is kind of a big question, but how do you recommend that someone does go about defining their personal brand? Like what are the kinds of things that they should look at or look for?
Sure. So I think it starts with yourself. I think it starts with defining what your mission is. I know that, we have our business. Everyone likes to kind of take personal and business life and separate them. I don't. I think that is everything kind of merges together. And it's like, what is your purpose and mission in life? And what do you want to put out into the world? For example, part of my mission is, empowering the next generation of our workforce, right? And so a lot of the things that I put out there and do goes back to empowering the next generation. So I think it's defining, what your legacy is and then leveraging the resources and platforms and connections in order to amplify that.
So is personal branding only for entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, or, can it help anyone? And if so, could you give an example maybe of how it could?
Sure. And that's a great question, Greg, because I think the personal brand differs depending on if you're an entrepreneur or if you are in-house as an account executive at a big company. The biggest thing about your personal brand is that maybe the strategy is different depending on your position. Having said that, I believe that your personal brand should go beyond what your current role is in that moment of time. So, if you do work for a company, you might not be able to do the same exact things or have restrictions if you were an entrepreneur. But if that company, if you might not be there forever. So what are you outside of that company? It's kind of that whole idea of a resume. It's resumes, the one page of resume in my mind doesn't say that much, right? It's what you're doing and your conversations with people. So I think your strategy may differ as to what position you're in at that time, but it's still so important to have a personal brand, no matter if you're an author, an athlete, just starting off in your career. I think it's important whoever you are.
Yeah, and I mean, so that brings me to in my own career, I'm still figuring out who I am day to day, I would say, but to a degree, I've figured out some of the themes and things that I like to focus on. But how would you recommend somebody, let's say a young professional, that they may not know what their life's work is going to be, or they most likely don't. But like, how do you get them to start thinking along that path? I mean, nobody can read the future, but how do you get them to think along those lines? Because I think what you're saying is really important. It may be hard for that account exec in a marketing agency that just started out to really see what their life goal is going to be.
Of course. And frankly, I mean, just graduating college, when I was, in college, and I had internships, since I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be in retail real estate for a second. And then I pivoted to two different PR agencies, boutique PR agencies. And I knew that, and I was taught and ingrained to always have a mentor, and to always like have a mentor in order to kind of give you that advice of how you can create the path of defining yourself. Now, we're always changing, right? I mean, life is not linear, but I think, I did see some of the young professionals when I was starting off kind of just being complacent and just kind of and cutting to work at 9, leaving at 5, and going home, where I always think it's really important to have a mentor or someone who you look up to who can say, okay, actually, instead of going home at 5, why don't you go and network, right? Or why don't you go and make these connections? So I always want to give young professionals the advice to open doors to themselves, because if you don't ask for advice or anything, then you're not going to get those words of wisdom, so you can continue to grow yourself, and don't be complacent.
Yeah, I like that. I also like that, what you touched on with the mentors being sort of the objective third party of, you're living your life day to day, and chaos may or may not ensue on a daily basis, but that mentor or that third party can kind of take a bit of a step back and see the trends and point out some things. So I mean, I certainly have relied on that myself. You have a podcast of your own, the Influencer Collective show. What's your goal with that show?
Sure. So, I started a podcast called A Dose of Your Future about 2 years ago, probably over 2 years ago at this point. And then, highlighted and interviewed some really interesting people, you being one of them, Greg. And I realized that there was a disconnect between A Dose of Your Future and my company, the Influencer Collective. I don't think people saw them as an entity together. So recently we rebranded A Dose of Your Future to be the Influencer Collective show. And our goal with the show is to, I've originally really have just interviewed people one-to-one, but our goal is to create an influencer network, and using the Influencer Collective show as a way to do that. So we're rolling out a series of roundtables that are going to be published as a podcast around really interesting topics, or topics that we focus on as a company: food innovation, cybersecurity, social impact, empowering the youth. So we're trying to connect and bring together recognized experts to problem solve and come up with solutions to help the better good and our economy. So it's pivoting the format a little bit, but ideally we're really trying to build a collective of recognized experts in these different verticals, and using podcasts as a medium to do so.
That's great. Yeah, no, sounds great. And I definitely enjoyed being on your show before, but looking forward to hearing some of the new ones, and seeing, because they're video as well, right?
Yes.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about entrepreneurship. That's certainly something else that you can speak to. So, what inspired you to start the Influencer Collective, and what was the need that you saw that you wanted to address?
Sure. So I had this fire in my belly, and I needed to tap into it. I could continue on the route of like going up the food chain at an agency, or I could do this myself. And I saw a need, particularly in the DC marketplace, for more digital. I know that there is digital here, but I kind of have a different perspective on it, and thought to myself, you know what? Why don't we just start a digital evolve as new digital mediums and channels are come out? For example, we focused on kind of the producing Facebook live shows, and still face live streaming is great, but now you have podcasting. So kind of always embracing the next generation of digital marketing trends, right? And I think having that, we're really in this situation where we're just going to continue to pivot and transform based on the marketplace. And that's something that I saw as a need in the DC market, since we needed something fresh, something different, something to also bring together all these amazing people in our city, whether that's from a Gen Zer to a baby boomer. So that's what we kind of sought out to create. But it's kind of cool after 3 years seeing all of that starting to come together. It really does take time to build a business, even though you want things to happen overnight.
Yeah, no, that's and I guess just wondering about that. The I'll just use the term agility. Your ability to kind of follow the market and stay one step ahead in many cases. Do you think that the traditional agency model, like larger companies, all that, do you think that they're failing clients by not being able to be as agile as you can as a it sounds like you're kind of nimble by design. I mean, do you see a failing there in the traditional structure?
I wouldn't say it a fail, because here's the thing. Like, I don't like to, speak negatively about other agencies or industries or what have you with their processes. I think that there is a definitely a need for the old school meets new school. So it's more so, how can the influencer collective work with a big agency to bring some of our, intellect and knowledge to a strategy for a client? Because most likely a lot of bigger companies, and some companies in general, bigger or smaller, are used to that traditional model and they feel comfortable there. So I think it's more so, how can old school meet new school, and we're the new school boat understanding the old school, so how can we all work together?
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, that makes sense. How have you seen your role or your company's role change due to recent events, like due to COVID-19, and what do you see as your role as people navigate the months ahead?
Yeah, another great question, Greg. I think here's the thing with the timing of right now. I mean, it, going back to your comment about being nimble, I I was thinking, like, would I rather be working at a company right now, or I'd rather have my own company? There's no complete right answer, but I will can say is, having my own company is I can determine and navigate the fate of my company. So, it has business been slower in regards to business development? Of course, as it should be. We're navigating a, nationwide pandemic, or excuse me, global wide pandemic. People are just trying to get to tomorrow to figure out the next step. So we're more so being here as a we already worked in a digital environment. So I've always worked, pretty much virtually. So that wasn't a huge difference for me, as I like to call myself a digital nomad. But we also are really just trying to strengthen our relationships with our current clients, and be a resource for other companies and thought leaders and entrepreneurs in the community. And we're focusing on building relationships right now. I mean, I think that we all need to not be sensitive, but also just be able to put ourselves in each other's shoes of where everyone's coming from, and really strengthening those relationships, and supporting the community as much as we can.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, one last question before we wrap up. What lessons would you share for someone that's considering, either getting out on their own, starting their own company, or, becoming a freelancer for the first time or something like that?
Sure. And so this is the other part is like I'm such an optimist, so I'm looking at, what's going on right now as how can like I like to look at the positives around it. So, of course, unemployment is very high, but how can you well, what is that dream that you've always had to build? Build it. So, I will always say when anyone's like looking in between opportunities or wanting to leave a company, I always am like the you should become an entrepreneur. So,
Mhm.
I'm always like, you should become an entrepreneur. But having said that, that doesn't mean that you have to quit your day job. You can always moonlight on the side and build it while you're still working. I always think to mitigate risk, if you're not comfortable just leaving and starting your company and, leaving stuff behind and not having multiple streams of revenue, that's not what I recommend. I recommend if you want to do something, do it, but also be smart about how you do it. So you set yourself up for success as much as you can and not failure. So maybe that is being part-time at your job and using the other time. But there's creative ways to become an entrepreneur with just not, leaving your day job and taking that big leap, especially during times like this where there is such, uncertainty.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of basically finding some way, whatever it might be, to have some kind of runway of, well, what if it's not even failure? It's what if it just doesn't take, it takes a little bit longer than you anticipated
Exactly.
to take off. Yeah.
Exactly. And that happens, right? I mean, it's funny because I'm looking back on, the past 3 years and I've just been kind of on a hamster wheel, just, taking, having clients and stuff. And now it's like the pandemic has made me realize, wait, this is the direction of the company. It's been sitting right here this whole time. Now let's continue to build it. So I think we're also in a sense of great clarity at the moment because we've had to slow down. So that's just something that I hope people are really cherishing and taking in is the slowing down.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's there's so many negative stories and so much, negative going on in general. Like I've said this to many others, is like if there's something positive we can take out of this, let's do it. And I think, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Is if you can step back, if you can get perspective on things, then, let's make something positive out of what would otherwise be a, just wholly negative situation. So, oh, that's great.
Exactly.
Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Sure. So they can either go to influencercollectivedc.com. You can follow us on the Influencer DC on Twitter and Instagram. And also feel free to subscribe to the Influencer Collective show on iTunes and Spotify.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jennifer Sherman, founder and chief strategist at the Influencer Collective, for joining the show. To learn more about both customer and employee experience, I recommend you go to my website at gregkillstrom.com and make sure to check out my latest book, The Center of Experience. More information is available on my website or wherever the book is available, like Amazon. Thanks for listening to The Agile World with Greg Killstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Killstrom. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, from my website at theagile.world or on Amazon or other retailers. Until next week, stay agile.